What do you think happens after we die?
I think mind and life go away completely when we die. And I think that's actually significantly important for the kind of beings that we are. Um, we are the kinds of beings that can come to that awareness, and then we have a responsibility to decide how we're going to comport ourselves towards it.
Can you linger on what that means? The mind goes away.
Like when you're playing music and the last instrument is put down, the song is over. Doesn't mean the song wasn't beautiful. Doesn't mean the song wasn't complex. Doesn't mean the song didn't add to the value of the universe in its existence, but it came to an end.
Is there some aspect in which some part of mind was there before the human and remains after? Something like panpsychism, or is it too much for us limited cognitive beings to understand?
Something like panpsychism, I take it seriously. I don't think it's a ridiculous proposal, but I think it has insoluble problems that make me doubt it. Um, any idea that the mind is some kind of ultimately immaterial substance also has, for me, just devastating problems. Those are the two kinds of framework that people usually propose in order to support some kind of idea of immortality. I find both very problematic. The fact that we participate in distributed cognition, that most of our problem solving is not done as individuals, but in groups. This is something I work on. I've published on that. I think that's important. But most of the people who do work on systems of distributed cognition think that while there's such a thing as collective intelligence, there's no good evidence that there's collective consciousness. In fact, it's often called zombie agency for that reason. And so while I think it's very clear that no one person runs an airline and there's a collective intelligence that solves that problem, I do not think that collective intelligence supports any kind of consciousness. And so therefore, I don't think the fact that I participate, which I regularly and reliably do in distributed cognition, gives me any reason to believe that that participation grounds some kind of consciousness.
Okay, there's so many things to mention there. First of all, distributed cognition, maybe that's a synonym for collective intelligence. So that means a bunch of humans individually are able to think, have cognitive machines, and are somehow able to interact through the process of dialogue, as you talk about,
Mm-hmm.
to morph different ideas together, like
Sure.
this idea landscape together. It's so interesting to think about. Okay, well, you do have these fascinating distributed cognition systems, but consciousness does not propagate in the same way as intelligence.
Yeah.
But isn't there a case, if we just look at intelligence, if we look at us humans as a collection of smaller organisms,
Yes.
which we are, and so there's like a hierarchy um, of organisms. Tiny ones work together to form tiny villages that you can then start to see as individual organisms that are then also forming bigger villages
Mm-hmm.
and interacting different ways, and function becomes more and more complex. And eventually we get to us humans, to where we start to think, well, we're an individual, but really we're not. There's billions of organisms inside us,
Sure.
both domestic and foreign. So isn't that building up consciousnesses like turtles all the way up to us, our consciousness? Why does it have to stop with us humans? Are we the only, like, is this the phase transition when it becomes a zombie like giant hierarchical village that first, like, there's like a singing angels and its consciousness is born in just us humans? Do bacteria have consciousness? Not bacteria, but maybe you could say bacteria does, but like the interesting, complicated organisms that are within us have consciousness.
I think it's proper to argue, and I have, that like a paramecium or bacteria has a kind of agency and even a kind of intelligence, kind of sense-making ability. But I do not think that we can attribute consciousness, at least what we mean by consciousness, this kind of self-awareness, this ability to introspect, et cetera, to bacteria. Now, the reason why distributed cognition doesn't have consciousness, I think, is a little bit more tricky. And I think there's no reason in principle why there couldn't be a consciousness for distributed cognition, collective intelligence. In fact, many philosophers would agree with me on that point. I think it's more an issue of certain empirical facts, bandwidth, density of connection, speed of information transfer, etc. It's conceivable that if we got some horrible Frankensteinian neural link and we linked our brains and we had the right density and dynamics and bandwidth and speed, that a group consciousness could take shape. I don't have any argument in principle against that. I'm just saying those contingent facts do not yet exist, and therefore it is implausible that consciousness exists at the level of collective intelligence.